Welcome to Exiles. Let's talk the balance manifesto for the upcoming Archnemesis 3.17 League. Like I say, this one hit me a little weird. I don't think I actually ended up liking it overall. I mean, there were some good changes in there, but there's some things that just I don't like or they bug me. It could be a personal thing, but I'll go over them. So, to start off with the overarching idea of this whole big thing they're saying, the main things they're trying to do is, in general, we're trying to focus on helping self-cast spell builds, and we think the damage on bow builds are low. So we're going to try to buff those, or we're going to make changes that help those things. And I don't necessarily feel like that's all they're doing. There seems to be a lot of negative consequences for the changes they made, and I'll go over why I think there are said negative changes. So to start off with, the main thing they're doing is they're saying, okay, spellcasting builds, they do a little too damage, and they have too few defenses and mobility. So their main solution, from what I can tell, is basically just make the damage higher. That's pretty much it. And then I guess if the damage is higher, you can invest more passives into things like defenses and maybe mobility, but they're not doing anything directly to affect your ability to play defensively with self-cast spells, or they're not adding any supports for that. Maybe they are in the notes, or they're adding some new skills or items that could contribute to that, but in the manifesto itself, it basically is just, here's a chunk of damage. With this extra damage, you deal more single target. Maybe you can invest in more defenses is the main thing I'm getting out of it. But where I have issue with this is because they're adding so much damage to spells, they're like, well, we need to compensate for all this damage we're giving to spells by nerfing a bunch of other things to counterbalance it. So like they said, traps, totems, stuff like that, it's too powerful. So to counterbalance the power we're giving to the spells, we're going to nerf these other things. So that way, they kind of even out. Like the trigger things, the trap things, the totem things, they should be at the same place with the buff to spells. The issue with this is there's a lot of things in the game that get affected, and they hit us with like one line where like, yeah, there's probably going to be some negative consequences, and we don't hit everything. And to me, I see a lot of scenarios where things get really screwed over. So in the big grand scheme of things, if things getting screwed over are just some that came to mind to me were attack-based trap or totem builds. There were no buffs to any of those things, yet they are receiving the nerfs of all the damage nerfs to things like cluster traps, for example, or to trap support, or to soul mantle. You know, like a lot of these things will affect. I mean, there's not a lot of attack-based trap builds or not a lot of attack-based totem builds, but the point is there is no buff to those builds at all, but they are definitely receiving the nerfs. They're getting wrecked. Some other things I noticed is ignite. They said, okay, so Ignite's going to be directly buffed by this because all these spells can hit harder, therefore their Ignites are better, so we have to nerf generically Ignite overall. And the counterbalance for that was, okay, we're going to buff a couple skills that deal specifically with Ignite. Blade Trap, Explosive Trap, Fire Trap. No, these are the trap ones, hold on. They're going to buff Armageddon Brand, Burning Arrow, Val Burning Arrow, Explosive Concoction, Fire Burst, Val Flame Blast, Penance Brand, and Death Wish. In their mind, these are the only Ignite skills in the game. And just as one example, I was thinking of doing a Hex Blast character. I don't know if you guys know this, but Hex Blast is specifically one of the good skills for Ignite. And it's not really used for anything else. There's not hit-based Hex Blast builds. It's basically Hex Blast Ignite or Hex Blast nothing. So it's kind of funny that you only pick these specific skills while basically all the other Ignite base skills are going to get shafted. And then there's other things in there, like Fire Burst is one of the ones they're supposedly buffing, but they're killing the cooldown on it, making the cooldown worse, which makes the build not like playable. It doesn't feel good to play with having a longer cooldown. Yeah, you might get bigger, fatter Ignites, but it's going to feel way worse mapping to have the cooldown be 50% longer. So stuff like this, like, I get like they want to have more control. Like the way I'm looking at this, it seems like they want to have more control over what things get stronger. So they didn't really buff spellcasting in general. They just took all the spellcasting skills and buffed them individually, but then nerfed a bunch of things generically, which affect a lot of other things. I don't know if I'm making sense, but So this whole change, it just hits kind of weird for me because there's way more things that are affected negatively than the things that are buffed positively. I mean, the upside is if you just play a self-cast spell build with, you know, one of the spells that are buffed, then you're good to go. You're having a good time, and it works out fine. Checking Lance, sometimes he gets stuck in that little tunnel thing over there. Can't really see it. But he's good. He's fine. And then the other thing that the big overarching change they wanted to do was hit-based bow builds. This one I thought didn't really hit the mark for me, or didn't really make sense to me either. And the main change they did here is they added a lot of like entry-level flat damage, which will help in the early game. Like they made bow bases deal more damage, or they made quivers, I guess, better. I mean, we don't know the exact numbers. Who knows? Maybe these numbers are just astronomical, and therefore it'll make the downside of the other changes okay. And what I mean by downside of the other changes is they took away the most important scaling thing for bow builds and projectile builds, which is Hydrosphere. So Hydrosphere was basically like a cane that made bow builds that couldn't have single target somehow have single target, and they basically killed that. And it also made other things completely broken, which is why it had to be addressed. But my point being is there's gonna be hit-based bow builds that end up significantly worse from losing Hydrosphere, where they were viable with Hydrosphere, and now they're not viable with Hydrosphere, even with getting a little bit extra damage. The other issue, I don't know if other people feel this way, but whenever I look at bow builds, I want to like bow builds. I really do. But it feels like you're so pinholed into Barrage Support. It's Barrage Support, or you don't have another option, because you just have to use it if you're doing single target scaling. It doesn't seem like you can really go other ways. If you go other ways, your single target's just garbage. And even with Barrage Support, I don't feel like bow builds have really felt that strong for single target, minus a few exceptions, like Elemental Hit can scale pretty high with a lot of investment. But even then, I think a couple leagues ago, a lot of people that were like talking up Elemental Hit would invest a ton into it, and they were like, it's not that good, which I don't know. So I'm kind of curious to see how this sort of stuff plays out. Like, I think it'll be nice if you just pick a skill that got a significant buff that isn't really related to the things that got like nerfed on the other side of it, then you're gonna have a good time. If you really cared about, maybe you really like attack-based trap builds, then you're gonna just get shafted by this. If you really liked a bow skill that was made viable with Hydrosphere, you're gonna get shafted by it. Stuff like that. There's some definite big positives, big negatives. There's some other cool things, like I don't know if cool, but like they hopefully fix Strength of Blood. The Strength of Blood is starting to remind me of the Worm build. So it's been nerfed multiple times now. It's getting up there. We'll see if Strength of Blood comes back with damage immunity, if you can still hit that cap you need to get completely immune. I think it's maybe still doable without life recovery rate. We'll see. I don't know. I'm sure somebody will try to figure out a way to do it. They fixed things like Shade Form, things that enabled Bone Shatter to be overpowered. It seems to be going away, but Bone Shatter still has its mechanics that work behind it that are really strong with Mantra of Flames, as far as I know. But maybe they'll address that. One of the cool things I liked for these changes were changes to Supreme Ego. Maybe this makes Supreme Ego more interesting because you can now get multiple auras with it. Might make Supreme Ego a cool thing to fit into more builds than it did previously. Nerfing March of the Legion, changing to add this blessing mechanic could be interesting in general. We'll have to see where that goes. And I think one of my favorite changes throughout this is removing Mortal Conviction and adding a support gem that allows you to make an aura free, but it prevents you from reserving mana. This to me is really cool because Mind Over Matter is one of the examples of a build I think of when I think of a build that's like kind of like in the background, because reserving mana is so powerful that Mind Over Matter is just falling farther and farther behind with the Archmage nerfs, with the Arcane Surge nerfs, with just the mana sustain nerfs in general. Mom's been hit pretty hard multiple times, and this maybe gives a little bit back to Mind Over Matter, because now you can at least get 150% reservation in your build type of thing. I don't know. All in all, I think the Manifesto wasn't really the huge nerf manifesto that a lot of the previous manifestos have been in like 3.15 and prior, but at the same time it also hit weird that it's like, oh, we're buffing these things, but there's a lot of like really weak stuff that is like getting kicked in the shins basically, because it's like not strong, not even like meta, but just get offhand shot in the head a little bit. Feels weird. Feels weird. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll see you guys in 3.17. Now.